So I'm an employment lawyer by trade. That's my background. But now I am MD of DCAR Legal. And at DCAR Legal, we do employment. We are a purely commercial firm. So it's employment, commercial property, corporate commercial, and immigration. Within our wider group, we also have DCAR International, who are accountants, tax advisors, and so we are able to work together, which is wonderful. And we are based in Surrey.
I went back and reflected, and I'm like, okay, so what's happened since lockdown? And it's like all these small businesses have to make so many decisions. The responsibility has been put on all these small businesses, and they've got to look at now health and safety, employment law, everything. And with the changing environment, you've got to put so many hats on, and it's so hard. And actually, you do need to go to the right people and get advice. It's not as simple as let's just open up. And you can see now with the changing of rules, with the 6 people now meeting up, the furloughing going away, and now a lot of ministers saying we need to bring that back in. But again, what that announcement that they made for the changes on Monday is already hitting loads of industries. Yeah. So it's so many things are happening, and you just got to be adapting.
Absolutely. And you've got to be really spontaneous with it, because all of these rules are coming in within a very few days. So just as you get your plan in place, something then change. You know, you're thinking, actually, we've innovated and changed the way we're going to work because we can't do it as how we have historically. And now something has changed and we can't do that. You know, and as you say, you know, Brexit's going to have the same effect potentially. So it's, you know, it's being on top of everything. There's a lot of plates spinning right now.
So if we reflect, like, what's the latest on furlough in a minute is that we know it's coming. Is it coming to the end of October? That's last.
Right. It's winding down at the present, and then it's going to be ending at the end of October. So over each month, there's a slight reduction in the payments that the government are making, with it all coming to an end at the end of October. Now, as you said this morning, there has been mention in the press of pressure from MPs onto the Chancellor to maybe extend further, possibly just for certain sectors, etc. And it may be, you know, obviously when it was originally put in March, it was only put in for 3 months up until the end of June, and then actually quite swiftly was extended. But, you know, we'll wait and see.
And we've had the ability to furlough flexibly since July. So there's been some adjustment to that, which again is challenging for businesses. So, you know, but they need that flexibility because on a granular level, they have to adapt to very localized changes, potentially local lockdowns. It wouldn't surprise me, actually, Anne-Marie, what you're saying, that we're going to see flexible deployment in if your area is categorized as a local lockdown, there will be some additional support temporarily for businesses. It has to be, you know, for it to work.
Flexible furlough, from my point of view and from my client's point of view with regard to furlough, flexible furlough was a good change in my mind. It lots of employers at the beginning, when we were talking about furlough, and we were saying it has to be for a minimum of 3 weeks, you can't do anything, you know, work wise. You can train, you can do voluntary work, but you can't work. Actually found that really tough. Whereas actually bringing people back and having them in, you know, half the week, few days a week, a few hours, the odd day here and there to run reports or whatever, actually has been really helpful, I've found.
Okay, and I've got a quick question, is whether it's along the furlough or not, but I had an experience. I've had one of these really poor weeks. So the other day, making a cup of tea in my kitchen, water started coming from the ceiling, something's happened in the bathroom. So I rang my builder, he's been my builder for about 10 years, and he goes, unfortunately, he's had the test and he's got to wait for a result. So his girlfriend's sister works in a school where a pupil's in Kent has had COVID. So because they were together in their bubble over the weekend, they've all had to take a test. But now, whilst he's not got the result, he can't go and work.
So what does that mean? So what does that mean for an employer if you've got a member of staff that actually genuinely is told to now isolate?
And
what provision is in place for them?
It is really difficult. The kind of, at least when we were all at home, that was one thing. people will get, whoever
Yes.
got ill for whatever reason, actually more limited because people aren't moving so much. As we start moving, more people are going to, even if they don't catch themselves, as you say, through track and trace or contact, etc., get caught out. That's where employers, what they need to do is they need to be thinking about what their policy is going to be, whether because actually, if you're just waiting for a result, if you're sick, let's start there. If you're sick, that's one thing. And you look at your sickness policy. What does your sickness policy say? You may have contractual sick pay for a period of time, in which case that would apply. Alternatively, we've got statutory sick pay provisions, but however, statutory sick pay provisions are 90 odd pounds a week. So, I mean, ridiculous. Who can live on that? And so, if you don't have the contractual sick pay, okay, you've got that. Now, also that again applies if you're sick. But what about if you are just waiting? If you are shielded, if you have been told to isolate, that's one thing, but the actual regulations with regard to SSP are really complicated. And are they going to be included for all of those people who've been caught out on a track and trace?
There's 5 days he had to wait for a test results. And then he might not have it.
Can't work from home.
And I again, so I think coming back to what you're saying, I think a lot of this is trying to anticipate or having a strategy to deal with that situation. Almost probably communicating with your team, staff in advance to say, our expectation is if this happens to you, this is what we would like you to do. Do you think it's all about looking at what you have in place and getting some advice around what strategy is sensible now?
Absolutely.
And not taking a shortcut and doing the wrong thing, because I can imagine employees now that have gone into the situation, like you said, £90 is not enough. We've got this flexible furlough, and just putting pressure on the employer to put me on flexible furlough and that. So that could be really wrong thing to do. So you've got to be very careful.
Yeah, if you are sick, whilst furlough is not there for sickness, it can, if you are eligible for furlough, and when I say eligible for furlough, what I mean is that you are eligible. So pre 1st of July, you have been, as an individual and an employee, have been furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So you've already been furloughed once. So anybody who hadn't been furloughed by the 1st of July, or for 3 weeks by the 1st of July, they're not eligible anymore. You can't suddenly decide you're going to, furlough another team. That time has passed. So with eligible furlough, it may be that you could put those individuals back on furlough. But as I say, we need to think about eligibility.
Yeah, and so while we're on that, I really do want to talk about risk and planning. But okay, so while we're on that, furlough's winding down, your business is not up. Is not great now. It's January, like what the news is in the press is saying right now, there's pent up demand. Everything's going okay. We're coming back. But say January, February, it all goes quiet, and then you have to start redundancies. Now, you being on furlough, is that discriminative if they start making the people that were initially furloughed first redundant and stuff? So how does that work?
Okay, let's start from the beginning. At the present, the furlough scheme is coming to an end at the end of October. Okay, so actually, by January, February time, everybody will either be back to work or under some other scheme, maybe, I don't know, but at present they should be back to work if they haven't left or haven't been dismissed. With regards to redundancy, what you need to do is for any employee who has been employed for 2 or more years, they are a protected employee, and therefore they need to, an employer needs to have a potentially fair reason to dismiss, and there's 5 potentially fair reasons, one of which is redundancy, and they have to follow a fair procedure. Okay, now I say that for those who have 2 or more years service, and I say they are referred to as protected because it means that if the employer doesn't get that right, they have a potential claim for unfair dismissal. Now, for those under 2 years, where they can only bring a claim for unfair dismissal if there's an element of discrimination in there. So we're talking about the Equality Act here. So we're normally talking about things like race, sex discrimination. Now, in this instance, we might be talking about disability discrimination. So it rather does depend on the individual as to why they were furloughed. It might be that actually they were just furloughed because everybody was furloughed or a whole department was furloughed. If, however, they were furloughed, for example, they were shielding because they've got a disability that meant that they were particularly vulnerable and had to shield, then actually what we need to think about is an employer can't discriminate on that basis. Okay, so when you're looking at redundancy and you're looking at the selection for redundancy, you need to make sure that and this is when I say the two elements. So is it a fair reason for dismissal, i.e. is it redundancy, and do you follow a fair procedure? The procedure would be kind of part of that is the selection criteria, and how are you going to select those for redundancy? If you're doing something like closing a whole department, well, actually, it's a whole department. We unfortunately we're not in the office. We no longer need reception cover. So actually, on that basis, it's fairly obvious who your pool of employees are. Yes, we put them on furlough, but we had a fair reason to do that. We closed the office. If, however, you've got a selection of say 10 people in a department and you furloughed 5, what you do need to ensure is that you don't just dismiss those 5. They've been out of the business, they're dismissed. Because actually there may well be grounds for, well, is that reasonable? Because it was just out of sight, out of mind. We've been out of the business for 6 months or however long. Okay, so you do need to bear in mind, because it depends. If the individual has more than 2 years, then they might attack, or there may be an ability to raise a claim for unfair dismissal, saying, well, this process was unfair because you just selected those people. Okay. Or they might say, well, I was shielding, I have a disability. This process is unfair because you dismissed me because I was on furlough because I had a disability. So it would be dangerous to say you just dismiss those who are on furlough because they've been out of the business.
Yeah, so
you need to think more deeply than that.
So the selection criteria is really important. And when people do it without the correct advice, they bring their own biases. They look at their own selection criteria just to suit their needs. So you need someone from the outside with the expertise to look at that selection criteria and make sure that's correct.
I think the truth is a lot of business owners and these have got so many decisions to make at the moment. And as a human being, we will tend to some extent shortcut or create our own reasons. And I think this is where, especially in relation to employment, the truth is most employers are going to be thinking, I don't need that person, they're on furlough. I will keep the people that I desperately need. So redundancies are probably, I would imagine, are likely to be more weighted towards those that have been on furlough. It's just logical. They're not needed. So, but I do think having a qualified HR legal expert to question the rationale, to document that is very helpful.
That's the thing. When it comes to redundancy, it's always about planning. So before you even start, plan what have you done to is it a genuine redundancy situation? What have you done to avoid redundancies? What costs have you cut elsewhere? What recruitment, have you stopped recruitment or limited recruitment going forward? Those kind of things. What other alternative, maybe salary reductions, that kind of thing? What have you done to stop that? But then also you want to be planning, as I say, you want to go through and don't prejudge the outcome of a situation. Make sure that when you're doing your consultation, that it is meaningful consultation and it's not a foregone conclusion. Because of this, you're right, it may be that actually those who have been on furlough are the ones who are made redundant. But actually what you need to do is you need to document to be able to justify your reasonings behind it. When at present, anecdotally, tribunal claim or claims that are coming into the tribunal and getting to tribunal hearings, 3-day hearings, are being listed for 2021, 2022.
Wow.
So it's a long time in advance. And if you're making decisions now, and God forbid you're on the witness stand in two years' time, you've got to remember why you made that decision. So document it and make sure that documentation, when you're looking at it, is reasonable. What we have to remember when it comes to the tribunal is what they will do. They're not allowed to replace your reasoning with their reasoning. But what they do is say, would a reasonable employer in that situation with that information, is that the decision you made, was it reasonable? Okay, so that's what they're looking at. Everything you have there, they will look at that.
In regard to that, Anne-Marie, and I think another interesting point is if we look at the history of what's happened with COVID, and what we thought at a particular point in time has varied a great deal. Initially, it was 3 weeks to go home. It's extended. There's ebbs and flows, and it's very hard to remember what the world was like at that point. So I would imagine your decision-making process should have an explanation of the wider context of the business environment at that time.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I come across documents that are not dated, and you think, date these things. If you're making a decision because of, making a decision about something about furlough because of specific guidance has just said we can do this, refer to the guidance. Looked at the guidance in this day and whatever. Make decisions, because actually we are all making decisions every day on the information we have on that day. And as you say, especially for things like furlough, the guidance has been updated and updated and updated ad nauseum. And we make decisions on that date, on the information we have, which may make no sense in 3 months' time.
Yeah.
But it's useful to be able to document it. One other thing before we get much further, what I do want to I think very, very important when it comes to redundancy for all employers to remember is, first thing you think about is, what are our numbers? How many roles are we looking to reduce? Okay, and by reason of redundancy. If you're hitting 20 or more employees that are going to be ultimately dismissed within a 90-day period because of redundancy, that triggers what's known as collective redundancy, and there are additional obligations. And it's really important that if you're anywhere near that figure or already over it, that you bear those in mind, because there are financial consequences if you don't. And when I say over a 90-day period, it might be that you say, okay, right now we're only making 15 redundant. We've cut deep enough. This is okay. We'll do 15. And then actually you get through that process, and suddenly in 6 weeks' time, you think, we didn't go deep enough. We need another 8. And suddenly you're over it, and you've retrospectively hit that target, and you haven't necessarily complied. So the extra obligations you need when you've hit 20 or more is you'll need a minimum 30-day consultation. So this is between 20 and 99 employees to be dismissed by reason of redundancy in a 90-day period. You need 30 days consultation minimum. You also need to notify the Secretary of State for Business. So the BEIS, you need to notify them. There is a form and there is a time limit for that. So it's 30 days beforehand. If it's 100 or more employees, then you're looking at a 45-day consultation period. Okay. So if you're hitting or you're anywhere around that 20 individual level, take advice. It is complicated, and you don't want to fall foul. Okay.
And do it now, because furlough, so you can do that consultation during the furlough period.
Yeah.
And furlough at the moment we know is ending at the end of October.
Yes.
So if we track back, we're kind of now on that deadline where it's all going to happen, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing. Very early on, when we had extensions to the furlough scheme, this is back kind of April time. One of the reasons for one of the first extensions was we were hitting the 45-day limit. We were 45 days out from the end of furlough, and therefore it was extended so that otherwise that trigger, you had 45 days. So at the moment, where they kind of dovetail, is that yes, you can, as an employer, you can consult with employees whilst they're on furlough leave. There are things to consider, but you can do it. You can make someone redundant as long as you've done it properly. You can do that. There are certain things, for example, if an employee were to, I'm going to say work your notice. What I mean is work your notice, but actually remain on furlough. you can actually still reclaim the elements through the scheme for that notice period. And recently, one of the recent updates was that, yes, you can claim the statutory notice and the contractual notice. What you can't claim is, you can't claim if you were to pay in lieu of notice. So rather than make someone either work their notice or work their notice on furlough, if you were to pay in lieu, that you can't claim that under the scheme. And you also can't claim the statutory redundancy pay. So just very briefly, what you would be paying an employee if they were made redundant is salary up to termination date, notice. It may be that that runs at the same time, or it might be, say, you pay in lieu. And then also for anybody with 2 or more years service, they're entitled to statutory redundancy pay. You may have other contractual payments that need to be paid as well. There might be bonuses, etc. But those are the main ones. I say anybody under 2 years not entitled to the statutory redundancy pay.
Yeah, and so bringing it back to, like you said, in April when they extended it because of that 45-day triggers, because look, BA, all these big companies started triggering it.
Yeah.
Then the government realised, and this is such an important thing, because I think what's happened out of COVID is we've learned, a lot of industries have learned a new way of working using AI, all these tools, working from home, retail shifting onto online, and the government we all know that the labour force is going to shrink. Yeah. And so everyone is affected and has to think about this, because it's not a simple matter that we're going to shrink 10% of the labour force and it's going to have no effect to the employers and that. So we have to think about this really carefully and plan it. And this is where and everything keeps changing. So we're talking about redundancy, but now what about if we're planning to go into work and the health and safety risks and stuff as well?
Taking
so
people
this is
back
just
into the office.
Taking people back into the office. We've not opened our office, but our thing about going back into the office is like, I mean, the government saying everyone go back into the office. Speaking to NHS England and from the other advisory, they're saying like that actually, if you can avoid going into the office and using public transport, then you should still have people working from home. But then the government's telling everyone to go into the office. For me, it's really confusing. And what do I have to do from a risk point of view?
As an employer, you have an obligation to and a duty of care to your employees to provide a safe working environment. Okay, so what is that right now? You need to undertake a risk assessment. So, and the risk assessment not only will be your premises, so can you be, as the common term now, COVID secure? Can you have the right distance between you? Are people sitting opposite each other? Are they, have you got hand sanitizer in place and one-way systems, those kind of things? You also need to think about numbers in your building. Can you set how many? You might have originally had 100 people on a floor, but can you actually have 100 people on a floor anymore? Those kind of things. You also need to think about actually, how do your employees commute to work? So it's not just once they get to work, it's well, if you're in central London and everybody comes in on the tube or on the trains, okay, what are you going to do about that? Can you stagger start times, end times, those kind of things? It might be that actually you find that no, you're not in London, everybody either walks or drives to work, and actually that's one thing less to worry about. But it's the first point of call is thinking about risk assessments. Look at your building, look at how you work, look at where people sit, look at where people go, where are the risky touch points, all of those things. And that's a good start.
And then so say we're going back to work, and a lot of my employees are young with kids at school. Some of my employees are old, they're from the BAME community, they've got diabetes. How do we manage all that? Because their kids, my parents are bringing stuff to the office. That's
the thing. That's something to cover off in your risk assessment. So it's also thinking about the individual circumstance. You might find that actually you will have, if your employees have been able to work okay from home, it might be that you think, I will wait. We won't bring people back just now. If they can't, then you need to think about actually each individual group of people. So actually you've got, parents who are, say, potentially might be being exposed a bit more because they're doing drop-offs, pickups, children coming home from school, that kind of thing. And also it may be that actually, the bubble that their child is in at school may close down at some point, and actually they're going to have to go back to work, back to working from home for a period of time. So you need to be able to think about that, and as I say, all of those vulnerable groups you need to think about and what you can put in place.
Can I ask Anne-Marie, leading on from Sheetal's comment, so there's a very practical assessment of the actual, but there's a sentiment. So two people with very similar scenarios might have a very different attitude.
Yeah.
So how do you have to account for their own personal wishes in this assessment?
Right. What you need to, it needs to be a case by case basis. You need to get your building, your premises secure first. And then what you need to think about are the case by case basis. If they and then talk it through with them. What are your concerns? Well, my concerns are going on the train. Okay, let's see if we can shift start times so you're out of, not that, I mean, from anecdotally from the press, actually very few people are on the tube at the moment. But okay, let's look and see if we can address that. So actually it's looking at each individual circumstance. If the individual, if you can actually answer all of their concerns, it might just be that they actually genuinely haven't gone out. They've kept their, distance from everybody. They've only gone to the supermarket, or they've only received deliveries because they thought, I'm only doing the minimum. I am staying home and I'm not going to do that. It is a mindset, and it causes anxiety in people, stress, and all sorts. I know personally, right at the beginning of lockdown, after we've been a few weeks in, the thought of going out appalled me. I was like, no, we're safe at home. I'm not going anywhere. Actually, it took a little while to get, really, for me personally, to build up the courage again to go back out. And it took a while.
So again, I'm an accountant. I open up my office. Now I've got the office open. It might not be 100% capacity, but I'm going to start, because of habit, I'm going to start getting clients to come in to drop books and have a half an hour meeting. How do I do that? Because that's probably like having an employee. You're bringing them into your environment.
It's something else that you want to think about in your risk assessment. How are you going to deal with that? Are you going to allow people to come in? If you are you going to have them sign something beforehand to say they haven't, as far as they're aware, they don't have any symptoms, they've not been in contact with anybody as far as they're aware? Are you going to have that? How are you going to prove these things? Your meeting rooms, how are they set up? Are you going, are there going to be, reminders? Because that's the problem. So we do get lulled as well. We start doing something, and then suddenly you go, oh, I'm back in the office, it's fine. Oh, I'll have a meeting. Oh, I'll shake a hand. And then you just go, oh, it's those kind of things. It's the reminders as well.
So if you have policy documents, so the partners get together policy, because I know they've done it in opticians and doctors' surgery. So anyone over 60, because of their age, we're not going to have it, let's say. And just like any clients, we're not being discriminative because of risk.
But you're documenting why.
Why? Come up with a general policy, and then also your administrator sends out a quick survey to anyone that's been booked into a meeting room, policy, until they come back with a survey saying if they've got any conditions and stuff. You can't have that room. So last minute it can get cancelled, that meeting. And it's having strong policies.
And I say it's just remembering and reminding, lots of reminders. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. Make sure, and picking people up if they're not doing it.
It's not business as usual yet.
Interesting. Even on the school drop-off that I'm experiencing now, which we talked about earlier, the school's been very good at managing the children when they get through the school gate. The challenge of the people outside, congregating, getting very relaxed, because and it did occur to me there were no signs outside the school to say keep your distance. There was no system out there, and we just revert to old habits. Because we're social people, right? So if I can round up and summarize, I think there is a clear theme here of kind of going back to basics, looking at what policies you have. And let's be honest, many small businesses may not have adequate policies. Making sure that you engage with quality advisors so they can pick you up wherever you are. reviewing the current situation and lots of documentation throughout, and planning and documenting and planning. And then finally, I guess it's, I don't know about your thoughts, but it's constant review. You know, we need to sit down at any new announcement every couple of weeks. Where are we at now? Keep doing that.
You're absolutely right. And you think, and then you've got to run a business.
So and our thoughts are on the business, the customer, the staff, and we need that expertise. So having the right people to go to offer the advice is really important.
I have to say, Anne-Marie, on a personal level, I found this incredibly useful. It's such a topical issue. It's so emotive. It's so and actually the risks of getting it wrong are really dramatic. Maybe not immediately, but as you say, the tribunal system, even if you get through this, you could be facing a number of claims. I suspect that will happen in the years to come. So doing it right now makes a massive difference.